Gonna go get some coffee real quick.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I think we're live now. Okay, everybody in the live chat should probably be able to hear all of us.
Are we live?
Yeah, we're live.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and do the introduction. So hang on a second. Okay. Hi everybody, it's Nate the Volunteerist, and today I have a very special guest joining us. He happens to be a huge icon within both libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. That would be Walter Block. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
So today we're going to introduce ourselves not just to the audience but to you, Walter, so that way you'll get to know us and how we all became anarchists or libertarians.
Okay.
So and I can hear myself probably from your window.
It's coming from Walter's end.
Yeah.
Did I do something wrong?
There's just a bit of an echo coming through your end.
What should I do to stop it?
Either lower your volume or turn down your mic sensitivity.
Okay, I lowered it. Is this better?
Testing.
Yeah, it's a bit better.
Okay, I think
Okay.
Yeah,
I can make it even lower if you want. I can still hear you. How about this?
testing. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, now there's okay. That's
good.
That's perfect.
Yeah, there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that being said, let's go ahead and do the introduction. So, Soy Boy, you got in contact with Walter along with a whole bunch of people. He's like the third guest in a row that you got in contact with to come on my show. So I'll let you go first.
Yeah. Hi, it's Harless. I became an anarchist like about a year ago, like in December or November. Can't remember. I'm an individualist anarchist type. And I'm 16 and I live in Massachusetts. So yeah. And also Tom Woods he turned me into an anarchist. So yeah.
Oh, sweet. Okay, hold on. Something happened. Okay. All right. How about I have Esso go next?
Oh, okay. Well, I officially became, I started identifying with anarchism 2017, even though I would argue I've always been incredibly state skeptical due to a lot of experiences that I had with the state growing up. So I've always recognized that political authority is an innately negative thing, and it doesn't have any accountability. It's just a matter of I heard arguments for anarchy later on, but in between that period, I really know exactly what an alternative would have been like. But anyway, as for my specific tradition, I'd consider myself an Austro-libertarian. I'm sure this is going to trigger you a little bit, but I'm an Austro-libertarian of more the Roderick T. Long tradition, and Sam Konkin. But generally, I share the same principles as a lot of people who conventionally consider themselves anarcho-capitalists.
All right. Hoplu, this is your first time on my show. I've been trying to get you on since I had David Friedman on 40 episodes ago.
I guess I'll go next. Hello, my name is Hoplu. I'm the ANCAP animator who makes a bunch of little cartoons every once in a while. One of these days, but I don't exactly remember when I became a anarchist. But I've always lived in either a conservative or a more mainstream libertarian household for my childhood and early teenage years. But skipping ahead, I consider myself a Austro-libertarian, more of the Hans Hermann Hoppe tradition. Can't get enough of that guy. But other than that, I listen to like whenever I'm doing work, say making cartoons or drawing or the like, I always find myself listening to either Tom Woods or talks from the Mises Institute, including many of yours, Walter Block. Yeah. Man, yeah.
Okay. Night Shift.
My name is Night Shift 10,000. I make videos on YouTube. I've actually been an anarchist, anarcho-capitalist ever since I was around 30 years old. And yes, it took me that long. I'm now 36. And I was very conservative for most of my 20s. And I finally started reading books by Wendy McElroy and Henry LePage. And I also read some of Gustav de Molinari's work, and of course Murray Rothbard's works. And you know, it took me a while to kind of pick up on it. I also read I also read stuff by L. Neil Smith, even though I was still a conservative and I was still very skeptical to the concept of libertarianism even then. But it took me a while. It took me a while to come around, but I did eventually at the age of 30, and I'm glad I did. And I've been an anarcho-capitalist ever since, and I have not looked back since then.
All right. I am Nate the Voluntarist. Fellow ANCAP gave me the title ANCAP Illuminati Leader. As for me, I started off as a lifelong liberal Democrat in the Hillary Clinton-Joe Lieberman camp for 10 years. Then I became disenfranchised with the Democrats and became a conservative Republican in the John McCain, Lindsey Graham camp. And then during the 2012 election, I discovered Ron and Rand Paul. Then I started listening to them. Then I found myself going in a different direction. I wasn't quite sure what it was. But it took me a few years until finally I became a minarchist libertarian shortly before Rand announced his candidacy for president. And then shortly afterwards, I discovered Eric July, and I started reading his Facebook posts, his columns, and of course started listening to his music. So yeah, Eric helped me tie the knot, and I became an anarcho-capitalist. So yeah, there you go. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and dive right into the topics?
Can you hear us, Walter?
Yes, let's dive into the topics.
Okay.
All right, let's go. So first topic is I'd like to discuss the Austrian school versus the Chicago school, what their differences are, and probably among other things, people might have other questions in regards to both of them. How about like you give us your take, Walter?
Before I do that, since everyone else gave their 2-minute history, shall I give mine, or do you want me to do the Austrian stuff?
That would be fascinating. I'd personally love to hear it.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
I'll
Go
tell
for
you,
it.
I'll tell you my history of becoming an anarcho-capitalist, and then I'll get into the Austrian versus Chicagoism. I was a pinko commie liberal of the Bernie Sanders stripe. I was a college student. I went to high school with Bernie, actually. We were on the track team together, and my views at the time were roughly his views. And Ayn Rand came to Brooklyn College to speak, and I came to boo and hiss her because, everyone knew that capitalism was evil. So after her lecture, I didn't get enough booing and hissing, and they had a lunch in her honor, and anyone was invited, even if you disagreed. So I wanted to show her that socialism was the way to go, so I went to the lunch. And she was sitting at the head of the table, and the people on the sides of the table near her were people like Leonard Peikoff and Alan Greenspan and Nathaniel Brandon, her chief cronies. And I was relegated to the other end of the table, and I turned to my neighbor and I said, hey, socialism is the way to go. Capitalism is evil. And he said, well, I don't really know about that, but the people at the other end of the table do. So I went up to the other end of the table, and I stuck my head between Ayn's and Nathan's. I was maybe 20 years old, and Brandon was 35, and Rand 55. So I was a kid. They were adults. And I said to someone who wants to debate someone on socialism and capitalism. And they said, who is it? And I said, me. I was sort of a chutzpahnik in those days. And Brandon was very nice. He said, look, there's no room at this end of the table, but I'll come to the other end of the table and I'll speak to you on 2 conditions. One, that you don't let the conversation lapse after this one discussion, but we keep going until we settle it. And 2, you read 2 books that I'll recommend. The 2 books were Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand and Economics to One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I went to his house and her house, and I read the books, and we discussed, and I was converted to minarchism, armies, courts, and police, and that's it for government. And then, 2 or 3 years later, I was accosted by my fellow student at Columbia University, Larry Moss, and his roommate, Jerry Wallows, and they said, you got to meet this guy, Murray Rothbard. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to meet Murray Rothbard. He's an anarchist. Anarchist is, sick, disgusting, evil, whatever. But finally, they prevailed upon me, and I met Murray, and he converted me to anarchism in about 5 minutes by using the Henry Hazlitt kinds of stuff on me. See, I used it to show that, we should privatize post offices, we should privatize sanitation, we should privatize education, we should privatize pretty much everything. And he did, because, you have competition and better products that way. And he just got me to apply it to armies, courts, and police. And that's how I became an anarchist.
Nice.
That is amazing, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Now, what I'll do is talk a little bit about Austrian economics and Chicago economics. Neither one has anything much to do with the country Austria or the city Chicago. Rather, they're named because the people who started them were respectively in Chicago or Austria. The Austrian main people would be Menger, Baumwerk, Mises, Hayek. They all started out in Austria. The Chicago people all started out at the University of Chicago. Milton Friedman, George Stigler, Gary Becker, and other people at the University of Chicago. So neither one is really geographically oriented. Rather, they are different philosophical views. The Chicago people are they are mainstream economists. And what mainstream economists have in common, whether they're Chicagoans or what would the opposite be, Keynesians or Harvard type people, what they all have in common is that they see economics as an empirical science. That means all we have are hypotheses. Like in physics and chemistry, they don't have any laws. They only have hypotheses. The hypothesis water will roll downhill and other hypotheses like that. And these are very well-established hypotheses, but they're falsifiable. Namely, you can if you come up with a case of water running uphill, we physicists, astronomers, whatever, will have to rethink our views. Whereas the way I see Austrianism, it's not really an empirical science. It doesn't go along with falsifiability of the Vienna logical positivist school. Rather, it's a branch of logic. And it's irrefutable. It's non-falsifiable. Now, this sounds cultish because, it's unscientific. Well, that means that the only science is an empirical science. But I think Austrianism is also a science, a dedicated, systematic study of branch of knowledge. Let me give you an example. I have this blue shirt. I bought this blue shirt for $20. When I bought the shirt for $20, how much did I evaluate the shirt at? Well, more than $20. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought it. If I had valued it at 15, I wouldn't have bought a shirt for $20. I valued it, let's say, 25. So I made a $5 profit. Well, the guy who sold me the shirt, how much did he value the shirt at? Well, less than 20. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sold it for 20. If he valued it at 50, he's not selling me the shirt for 20. So let's say he valued it at $1. Why so low? Because he had hundreds of shirts, big inventory, and wanted to get rid of a shirt. So he made a $19 profit off of me, and I made a $5 profit off of him. Now, our friends, the Marxists, would say we each exploited the other, but this is silly. We each made a profit. Namely, here you get Mises's human action. Human action is an attempt to make the future a better situation for us than it would have been had we not engaged in human action. Now, I regard that as a law. I don't regard that as a hypothesis. I don't see how you can test that. And I see all sorts of other economic insights as laws. For example, rent control leads to lousier housing. Free trade is mutually beneficial. I just gave an example of that with the shirt. A minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers. You can go just down the list of economics. So the main difference between us guys and them guys is we see economics as a school or a tool of praxeology, namely the logic of human action, and they just see it as an empirical science. Now, there are other areas where we disagree. Austrians aren't really big into indifference because if I was indifferent between buying the shirt and not buying it, I would never act. The only thing compatible with human action is preference, not indifference. And then there are different views on the business cycle theory, and subjectivism is very important to Austrians. Now, I just wanted to mention few words about the difference between the Chicago school, who are part of the mainstream economists, and the Keynesian school, who are part of the mainstream economics. And there's only a dime's worth of difference between them. The main difference is Friedman and his buddies are monetarists. They think that the economy, they all agree that there's market failure, depressions and monopoly and externalities and public goods are all market failures, where Austrians never met a market failure that we agree with. There ain't no such thing as a market failure for Austrians, which is a big difference. The big difference between the Keynesians and the Friedmanites are if there's a depression or a recession and the economy is always veering off into one or the other, Friedman, a statist, advocates monetary policy, whereas the Keynesian advocate fiscal policy, taxing and spending. So I don't regard that as a crucial difference. They all think that the market is unstable and we have this market failure of depressions and recessions and inflation. So that would be a summary of the difference between Austrianism and mainstreamism on the one hand, and between Austrianism. Well, I should say that the Chicago school, bless their hearts, they are more free enterprise than the Keynesians. The monetarism, I don't think, is very free enterprise, but, Friedman was really good on, free trade and minimum wage and rent control and occupational licensure and a whole bunch of other things, whereas the Keynesians are not as good at that. But, Friedman, what did he specialize in? The two things he was horrible at, namely school vouchers and monetarism. He had this thing, Free to Choose, a TV series. And yet people were free, when they were free to choose money, they chose gold. And yet he is a fan of the Fed. So he's not really a free enterprise, although I do acknowledge that they are more free enterprise than the Keynesians. But, that's not very praiseworthy because the Keynesians aren't that free enterprise.
I think Chicago School also holds the position of inflation, if I'm correct. Inflation more inflation would cure the depression.
Yes, that's correct. Friedman favored the 3% monetary rule that the Fed should increase the money supply by 3% a year because he thought that productivity in the rest of the economy would go up by about 3%. He wanted to have a flat price level, whereas the Austrians, we're not necessarily in favor of a flat price level. Like when TVs first came out, they were very expensive, and now they're cheaper. When computers first came out, they're very expensive, and now they're lots cheaper. The same thing with air conditioning. The same thing with a lot of things. Nothing wrong with deflation, namely lowered prices, or even inflation if we discover more gold than than productivity increases. We don't really care about that. We only care about governmentally induced deflation or inflation. But if the market comes up with higher or lower prices, that's not problematic.
Yeah, they both sort of make the same fundamental problem in their premise, which is the idea that prosperity can be, just sort of forced out of thin air. Like there's no actual productivity, no wealth being generated. It's just poof, the government creates it by either redistributing a bunch of assets and creating false market signals through the demand curve or through the supply curve. Either way, the result is always the same. You get market signals disconnected from what's actually like the wealth in the economy being produced, and as a result, you end up with a surplus of food.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Before you get to the next question, what I would like to do, maybe a little bit off the program, is make some comments about what I heard about the people who were introducing themselves. Would that be okay?
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Okay, my first comment is on the 16-year-old. Watch out, boy. I'm going to come kidnap you and make you come here to Loyola and study with me. I'm absolutely kidding. I don't think that kidnapping is compatible with libertarianism, but I do want you to consider when you go to college to come and study with me, and not just me. I have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 free enterprise professors here, and not too many schools can match that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, the second. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It would definitely be improvement over my economics class in public schools. So yeah.
Great. I used to teach in Massachusetts at Holy Cross, but I didn't get tenure there. I was too free enterprise. The second person said that he was sort of a fan of Konkin and Roderick Long.
Yeah, that was me.
I'm not too familiar with Konkin, although I know him personally. He was into agorism, which is, sort of a bunch of buddies get together and live together, which is okay. I have no problem with that. But I do have a lot of problems with Roderick Long.
Yeah, I was actually, I sort of gathered that by watching some of the presentations Roderick T. Long of him that are available on YouTube, and I was kind of interested about that. Like,
I think Roderick Long is a splendid philosopher and a friend of mine, but we do disagree. See, the way I see libertarianism, there are really 5 levels of libertarianism. The top of the heap is anarcho-capitalism. Why is the top of the heap? Because government violates the non-aggression principle. And the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle, private property rights based on homesteading, and free association. The next level down would be minarchism. Minarchism means armies, courts, and police, but nothing else. And the most famous anarchist, I would say, would be Murray Rothbard, and the most famous minarchist would be Robert Nozick and Ayn Rand. Then one level down below that would be constitutionalism. Constitution as interpreted by people like Judge Andrew Napolitano and Ron Paul, not by our present Supreme Court. And why do I put this lower than minarchism? Because in the Constitution, they had post offices and post roads, and I'm against both of those, the government doing it. The 4th level down is Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, and I call them classical liberals, but they're part of the libertarian movement because they sort of do favor free enterprise, but they have a lot of compromises. Now, the fifth level down, and here we're going to get into Hans Hoppe and Roderick Long, because I have the same criticism of both of them. They are what is called thick libertarians, Thick, thick libertarians. Thin libertarian versus thick libertarians. A thin libertarian believes in private property rights, the non-aggression principle, free association, and that is it. Has no opinion on anything else, qua libertarian. Whereas the thick libertarian has opinions on other things and says that they're part of libertarianism. For example, the left-wing thick libertarian, like Roderick Long, says that bossism is bad. Bossism is bad. I mean, why should and hierarchy is bad? Is it incompatible with libertarianism? That's nonsense. Also, somehow it's good to have, you have to like homosexuals and you have to like interracial marriage. And the proper thin libertarian view on interracial marriage and homosexuality is no view at all. No more view on those things than on chess versus checkers or vanilla versus chocolate ice cream. Whereas the right-wing thick libertarians like Hans Hoppe have the view that people like these types of people should be excluded from society, which I find a great problem. Another problem I have with Hans Hoppe is on immigration. He favors a regulation of immigration. He wants to allow some people in. He doesn't want to say the border should be closed. He himself came from Germany, and he certainly would allow people like himself, brilliant, creative economists, philosophers. But he wants to have regulation. And I asked myself, suppose somebody comes from Mars or Africa or India or China, I don't care where, and takes a helicopter and lands in the middle of the Rocky Mountains in, say, Wyoming or in the middle of Alaska and starts homesteading virgin territory. Well, did that person violate the non-aggression principle? No, did not, because we libertarians have anathema toward unowned property or government property, and here is unowned property, never homesteaded by anyone, and Hans Hoppe would stop people at the border from coming in and doing that. Now, it's true, most of the immigrants don't want to do that. They want to go to the city and get welfare, but that's a different issue. The point is, in my book, Defending the Undefendable, I defended the pimp. I sort of defended the platonic pimp, not actual pimps who violate rights of their prostitutes. But could there be such a thing as a pimp who never violated the right of a prostitute? Of course he could. So therefore, pimping is not per se incompatible with libertarianism. Well, neither is immigration. If I can show one case of an immigrant not violating rights, then if you prohibit him from coming into the country, you're violating rights. On the other hand, I do agree with Hans that a lot of these immigrants are not good guys, not just because they vote the way to make our country more like the country from which they left in disgust, but also there's a lot of criminality in Scandinavia and Germany and stuff like that. So how can we have our cake and eat it? How can we adhere to libertarian principle and also safeguard ourselves? And my answer is privatize every square inch of the country. And then if a person comes into the country without an invitation from somebody, he's a trespasser. And then I have one little more lagniappe on this. Most people think that babies come from sexual intercourse. No. This is due to public education. The truth of the matter is babies come from storkovia. They're delivered by a stork. And if there's a blue blanket, it's a boy, and if it's a pink blanket, it's a girl. The point I'm trying to make is that babies are immigrants. And if you want to have regulations on immigrants coming from other countries, you have to have regulations on immigration coming from storkovia, namely new babies, which is a horrible sort of a thing for libertarians to contemplate. So therefore, I think that Hans's view on immigration is highly problematic. Another person said that they like Wendy McElroy, Molinari, and Rothbard, and I certainly agree with that. So those are my comments on the introductions that you've all made, and either you can comment on my comment about you, or you can ask the next question.
Well, actually, I did want to mention Wendy McElroy did actually just come out with a new book, and I would suggest if you want a good read, definitely look for that.
I'm a big fan of Wendy's.
And I was going to comment, I myself am also very skeptical of Hoppe, but I think that perhaps you may be misunderstanding both Hoppe and Roderick T. Long, because at least to my knowledge, Roderick's never made the case that bosses or organizational hierarchy are incompatible with libertarianism. In its ethical philosophy, more that the model of organization which we sort of currently have in society wouldn't be an accurate representation of how a state society would look for various reasons which even Mises and Hayek went into.
Well,
what happened? What happened?
We'll have to agree to disagree on that. I know Roderick, I'm a friend of his. He said that several times. I've criticized him on it. He thinks that bossism is a bad thing and that somehow libertarians should support interracial marriage and should support homosexuality. So I disagree with him. Hans, to be fair to Hans, what Hans says is that, well, you know, if an immigrant comes to the middle of Wyoming in the Rocky Mountains, the government is really the agent for all the taxpayers. And I say, whoa, that's a problem because, you know, we're supposed to be anarchists here, and government being the representative of the taxpayers is not anarchistic. And also, no government agency ever homesteaded that territory. So how can they claim ownership of it? So I diverge from Hans on that issue.
Right, and that's fine. I lost my train of thought. my train of thought.
I'd say, like, I'll try to, like, I'm not gonna touch on your immigration. Like, I do understand, and I do have agreements with a good bit of it. But I think that an important thing to note, like, this is more so a nitpick than a mic drop argument is the fact that Hans is more so talking in the current climate. Here's what you should do to say stop the state from, like, especially European states from importing like they actually, like, if you actually look at what the European states are doing, they actually punish the hard-working migrants because of union regulations and the like, basically threatening to deport them if they step out of line in the workforce, but they're nice and cozy on welfare checks and whatnot. But on the part about say homosexuals, like I think he's noted a good few times, like I don't remember which speech it was, but he said that he did not have any sort of ethical or legal objections to the existence of alternative lifestyles, which I am actually a part of, but that's more so anecdotal and relevant to the argument. But basically, that he has no problem with alternative lifestylists so long as they, number one, acknowledge the fact that sort of the traditional nuclear family is sort of the backbone of society, and to not infringe upon it, either by force or by just that being a bad neighbor or whatnot. But those are just my two nitpicks.
And just
I don't think it's really a nitpick. By the way, before I read a quote from his book, Democracy, a God That Failed, on this very point, I wanted to say that I revere Hans. I regard myself as a friend of his. I think he's made more contribution to libertarian theory than pretty much anyone else. His stuff about the argument from Argument is just magnificent, setting the tone for defending libertarianism. But let me read something from page 218 from his book, Democracy, a God That Failed. What he says is, quote, "One may say innumerable things and promote almost any idea under the sun. But naturally, no one is permitted to advocate ideas contrary to the very purpose of the covenant of preserving and protecting private property, such as democracy and communism." Well, you know, we should kick people who favor democracy and favor communism out? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think they're wrong and immoral, but I don't think that advocating these things is a crime. To continue, there can be no tolerance toward Democrats and communists in a libertarian social order. They will have to be physically separated and expelled from society. Likewise, in a covenant found for the purpose of it protecting family and kin, there can be no tolerance toward those habitually promoting lifestyles incompatible with this goal. They, the advocates of alternative non-family and kin-centered lifestyles, such as, for instance, individual hedonism, parasitism, nature-environment worship, homosexuality, or communism, will have to be physically removed from society too, if one is to maintain a libertarian order. Now, I regard this as highly problematic. When I read this, I wrote to him or talked to him. I said, look, this is an error. Can't you just change this in the next edition of the book, or say you were mistaken? And he declined to do that. And instead, he continues to advocate this view. Well, look, homosexuality should not be removed from society. Yes, they can be removed from a covenant. If you have a straight covenant and you don't want homosexuals, fine. But then the homosexuals can have another covenant and not allow heterosexuals in there. Namely, from a libertarian point of view, heterosexuality and homosexuality are equivalent. As long as they don't violate rights, both are welcome in society. And he says they should be removed from society, and that is a big problem.
And just to clarify,
hold on, Esso. I don't mean to interrupt. It's just that there's quite a bit of echoing going on.
I'll make my thing lower. How about that? Is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
When I make it lower, I can hardly hear some of you. I can hear some, but not all people, so I have to raise it to hear people.
Okay. Is that fine?
It should be fine. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I've never heard Roderick T. Long say, I think people should be forced not to have bosses, or that's the sort of organization is incompatible with libertarian ethics, or forcing people to accept to be in an interracial relationship. But even if he did say that, that's not my position. My position is essentially the one I described to you. I think that a philosophy is only really as strong as its presuppositions. So I think that sort of quabbling over ethical dilemmas is really pointless if you don't have any sort of cohesive narrative to work it around, which is why I think practical descriptions of a libertarian society are important.
Well, look, after this is all over, what I'll do is I'll send out to Nate the voluntarist, because I have his email. I will send you stuff where Roderick Long and his buddy Kevin Carson say exactly the things that I'm saying that they say.
All right, sounds good.
Sure.
Also, I wanted to ask about Kevin Carson. I know you dealt with him in the past and you acknowledged his work. Because I can't remember. I think you guys debated something about he said on Twitter he's okay with the government regulating corporations if they become too big. So he's okay with net neutrality and antitrust laws, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that's true. And I, as a libertarian, oppose all that. I don't think that monopoly is a market failure. Yes, government creates monopoly, and government-created monopoly would be very bad. But if Microsoft is the only one, well, no, not Microsoft, IBM. IBM is the only one making computers, and for a time they were the only one making it. The mainstream people, the Chicago School and the Keynesians would say we should have antitrust. And we Austrians say that we libertarians say we shouldn't have antitrust, and we Austrians say that single sellers of the variety of the first guy to make air conditioning, or the first guy to make computers, or the only supermarket in a small town, there's no misallocation of resources, there's no market failure. And therefore, welfare is not decreased by these people, but rather increased by these people.
Before we get too deep into the Q&A, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Mises Institute.
Oh, I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute. Murray Rothbard. The way I see the Mises Institute is sort of Murray Rothbard's living room expanded greatly. When I was under Murray's tutelage, he was my mentor. We'd go to his living room. We'd have discussions. There'd be 15 or 20 people there. And the Mises Institute is it really should be called the Mises Rothbard Institute if you wanted an more accurate name for it to describe exactly what it's doing. Yes, it supports Mises's views, and it also supports Rothbard's views. So I'm a big fan of theirs. I am a regular speaker for them. I go to the Mises University for many years. I go to many of their events, and they've just restarted the Libertarian Scholars Conference in New York City, and I've been to one of them, and I'll be going to others in the future, I hope. What they do is they make available all sorts of resources for free on the web. You can get Man, Economy, State, and Human Action, both, 800-page books for free. And go read LewRockwell.com, L-E-W, Rockwell.com. And your socks will be knocked off. And Hans Hoppe is a supporter of the Mises Institute, and the Mises Institute is a supporter of his. Look, I don't want to leave you with a misimpression that I disagree with Hans on a lot. I just disagree with him on one little thing. Yeah. But otherwise, I think he's really good, and he is certainly one of the senior scholars, as am I, of the Mises Institute. So I can't say enough in support of the Mises Institute. They are not Beltway libertarians. They're not Beltway Austrians. They are pure Rothbardians on everything.
All right. So I think we could go ahead and continue on in the Q&A. So if anybody has any other questions.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I actually I didn't get to a chance to say what I had to say just yet. This is sort of the last thing I will say on Hans Hermann Hoppe, so that we don't be here all day. But just like this is there are sort of 2 points in sort of his exclusion from society point. But basically, in terms of say Democrats and commies, like obviously, I think that today it's sort of a well, you're abiding by the standard narrative, or oh well, you're abiding by the standard cultural or counter narrative. So there's not really much we can fault you for. But in sort of an anarcho-capitalist society, it's basically akin to advertising that you are a robber, or that you are a thief, or that you promise to be a robber or thief. And in the current day, it's kind of like calling yourself, and I promise you there are actual people who do this, and it's horrible, but people calling themselves minor attracted person, which is, it's as bad as it sounds. So it's basically to either not necessarily take preemptive violence against them on their property, but to sort of exclude them, to ostracize them from civil society via voluntary means, like for example, not selling to them in stores, kicking them out of parties, refusing them service, etc., etc. And that's kind of what physical removal really means. And another thing is that he's like to the advocates of alternative lifestyles. Stefan Kinsella pointed out that advocates of does not necessarily mean member of those alternative lifestyles. It's more so the people who would advocate those alternative lifestyles in contrast or to degrade the regular lifestyle, like for example the more social justice types. But that's just what Stefan Kinsella says. And again, Hoppe says that he is fine with the existence of alternative lifestylists so long as they acknowledge the importance of and does not infringe upon the regular lifestylists. And lastly, this is more so a semantic thing, but I think what he means by saying they must be excluded from society is less so there must be, it is by law that people must do this, but more so in a you must drink water if you want to survive, or you must eat food if you want to not be hungry kind of thing, where or it's a good thing to not tolerate the presence of nasty people, of bad neighbors, and to exclude them from your property, from your covenant communities. And I know for a fact that when Hapa did make his sort of a point about covenant communities, Murray Rothbard himself commented, yeah, this can create sort of a mosaic of traditional and countercultural societies. But yeah, that, again, this is, we can, I'm up to discuss this another time, but just so that we're not here all day, that's the last I have to say about Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Well, I disagree with you very strongly. Look, remember what I said about libertarianism? It's three legs, like a three-legged stool. First one is the non-aggression principle. The second one is private property rights based on homesteading. The third one is free association. We libertarians believe you can discriminate against anyone. You can discriminate against homosexuals. You can discriminate heterosexuals. You can discriminate against gays, men, women, blacks, whites, Jews. Doesn't matter. It might not be nice, but you can do it. You can boycott, you can discriminate, you can ostracize. But that's not what Hans says. What Hans says is physically removed from society. That's a direct quote. I got the book right in front of me. I'm not lying. You can read the book. I certainly wouldn't make up a thing like this. He says physically removed from society. Now, that's not libertarian. That's violating the non-aggression principle. And this idea that just because you're a commie or you're a Democrat or you're a socialist, that's not a threat. That is not a crime. Do you really think we should put people in jail for thinking something or for saying something? Look, I now say I'm a socialist. And by the way, I was a socialist before I met Ayn Rand. I should have been put in jail. I should have been removed from society. This is despicable. But you're a good defender. Nice try.
Thank you very much. Again, I do have responses to that, but I don't need to clog up the Q&A. But if you want to have a further discussion, I'll have someone provide you ways to contact me. But thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I just wanted to say something along those lines. I myself have actually studied a lot of communist philosophy. I've read a lot from writers like Peter Kropotkin, who claimed to be the first technical, quote-unquote, anarcho-communist. Sorry, I can't say that word, that jumble of words without laughing a little bit, but yes. And I've also read some of the works of Karl Marx. And I hate to say that, but I have. And honestly, the reason I don't discourage people from doing the same is because studying communism only turned me more against it. Because, I mean, I was sitting there reading Das Kapital, thinking to myself, my God, do people actually believe this? Do people actually take this seriously? And so, honestly, it turned me more against communism. And if that can turn a person like me more against communism, then I would say, please, study communism, because it'll blow your mind and it'll make you, I mean, it'll probably make you think the same thing. Like, do people really believe this? Do people actually take this stuff seriously? And I mean, it'll probably turn you more against it. So, I mean, that was just kind of my own personal experience.
Well, I share your experience, but the point of fact is Bernie Sanders gets 10,000 screaming fans. Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren, the same thing. These people are very dangerous and they're evil, but I don't think they should be put in jail, and I don't think they should be excluded from society, namely kicked out of their homes and banished or something like that.
Exactly.
But the fact of the matter is, we libertarians, what does the LP, the Libertarian Party, get? 1-2%? What does the Democratic Party, which is now turning socialist, get? Well, roughly 49% or 50% or 51%. I don't know, 48%. There are a lot of socialists. And look, I have family members, and who are socialists. They're not evil. They just don't understand what's going on. Yes, there are some socialists who are really evil. Some are just economically illiterate. But we have to try to appeal to these people. We have to give them a copy of Atlas Shrugged or a copy of Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson and try to convert them. Unfortunately, there are all too many socialists, not just in the U.S., but all around the world. We libertarians are the odd man out. And if you start talking about excluding people from society, they can exclude us too, and that would be unjustified as well. And they are doing that. Nowadays, a lot of the webs, the Twitters and the Facebooks, what's his name? Ron Paul's buddy, McAdam, just got deplatformed for saying that Hannity was a moron or an idiot or something like that. I mean, Ron Paul walks on water. It's sort of Saint Ron Paul, and McAdam, his buddy, to get deplatformed. So yes, it's justified because they own that, and what we libertarians and conservatives ought to do is get our own platforms so we can allow anyone to say anything they want except a threat of physical violence. If you threaten physical violence, then that should be a crime. If I seriously said, I'm going to kill Nate the voluntarist because I disagree with his views, I would be a criminal. But to just be a socialist is not, therefore, to be making a threat per se.
Well, I think John Stuart Mill said it best. The only freedom which deserves the name is that of pursuing our own good in our own way, so long as we do not attempt to deprive others of theirs or impede on their efforts to obtain it. I just wanted to get that out there.
Well, I'm
a big fan of John Stuart Mill, especially his On Liberty, where he talks for free speech. But he was a utilitarian, and I'm a deontological libertarian. So I think that if we adhere to the libertarian views of non-aggression principle and private property rights and free association, we will we will bring about a more prosperous society than otherwise. But I'm not really a utilitarian. Because, you have the problem of the utility monster. Suppose there's somebody who is a cannibal and enjoys eating us more than we enjoy being killed and eaten. Then we would have to, give ourselves to him, and that would be promoting utility. But that I see as a problem.
Esso, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, this actually, what you were talking about earlier about messaging, that actually gets into a question which I had for you, or more a point that I was going to ask you what your thoughts were on it. I've sort of observed something really interesting, which I've never seen any other, at least libertarian philosopher that I know of, acknowledge this. I think that it's sort of the key to libertarianism getting a mainstream appeal, and this is why I think agorism is sort of the best continuity of libertarian philosophy, which is that a lot of the reason why people are ideologically in line with the state is because state societies, by sort of threatening people with legislative policies, are incentivizing people to look at philosophy and material interest as being interchangeable with one another.
Well, as I say, I knew Sam Konkin. He was a good guy, a good libertarian. And if he wants to gather his buddies into a little commune, all I can say is God bless him. But the idea that they should only trade with each other, I'm not sure he held that view, but I certainly don't. I go to McDonald's and I go to Burger King and I go to Walmart, and I don't ask about the political views of the people who are selling me stuff. I don't want to know. I'm afraid they're all socialists and I might not want to buy for them, and I need the burger, so I just ignore that. And I think he was saying that, we should only trade among libertarians, and that sort of violates the view that all economists would have of specialization and division of labor. The reason we're so prosperous is we have a gigantic, almost free trade area in the United States, and if we had to limit ourselves to just dealing with libertarians, we'd be in trouble.
That was actually sort of the exact opposite of his point. His point was that the way to actually sort of subvert the narrative structure which perpetuates this view of states being interchangeable with people's material interests would be for libertarians to engage in productive gray or black market activity, as he described them, creating shirts which aren't really licensed and then selling them to people for profit. And the idea is that if you create these sort of subversive networks which undermine these sort of legal cartels and state firms, what you can do is you can create a society which discourages people from associating with state firms and encourages entrepreneurship and undermining the state.
Well,
And
I certainly favor undermining the state, and I regard Sam Conkin as a good egg, but I guess we have a divergence of opinion as to what he really stood for.
Well, and that's sort of, I guess, the point that I was getting at is I as being the best way forward in terms of political organization, because it's not really political organization, and it simultaneously also undermines the sort of narrative structure that the state perpetuates, which I was talking about, which libertarian messaging, I think, has no better way of doing than just directly going out there and selling stuff to people.
Well, you know, a lot of libertarians are against the political process. I'm not one of them. I asked myself, who are the two people who were more instrumental in converting more massive people to libertarianism than anyone else? And the two that I came up with were Ayn Rand for my generation. I'm 78. You guys are a little younger than me. And guess who for your generation? Ron Paul. Well, what was Ron Paul? Yes, he was a doctor, but he didn't convert too many people as a medical man. He converted them as a congressman. Thank God for Ron Paul, or we'd have half the libertarian movement would not be in existence. So I'm not a real big fan of the Libertarian Party, although I did run for office there. And in the past, I was more of a fan. They keep attacking Ron Paul for some ungodly reason. But even I'm still a member of the Libertarian Party, and I still support them. And I hope that one day they'll improve their, stop criticizing Ron Paul. I'm not that I'm against criticizing Ron Paul. Look, I've criticized him myself. We disagree on abortion. But when I criticize him with great, magnificent respect. These guys are sort of trashing Ron Paul, and you trash Ron Paul, that's sort of a litmus test as to your libertarianism. Look, guys, I've allotted 1 hour for this, and we've got 3 more minutes, so maybe 1 or 2 more quick questions.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a question. What are your thoughts on David Friedman's flagpole argument against the NEP? Have you ever heard of it?
Say that again. I didn't hear you. David Friedman on what?
He made a flagpole argument against the NAP, and I was wondering if you ever heard of it.
Oh yeah, I have an article criticizing him on the machinery of freedom. He doesn't like. He says something to the effect of no one sentence can explain libertarianism. He is a utilitarian, and I'm against utilitarianism. He is an anarchist, but he's not a deontological anarchist. He believes not only should we have competition of private defense agencies, but we should also have competition about libertarian law. I don't think we should have any competition about libertarian law. I think that the non-aggression principle, private property rights, and free association is it. And if you don't agree with those things, you're not a libertarian. You might be an anarchist. And he talks about the Comanches and other groups that are anarchists, and they might be anarchists in the sense that there's no monopoly of power on the part of the state, but they're not libertarians. To me, there shouldn't be any competition between laws. There's libertarian law and only libertarian law is justified. Whereas David wants to have competition between different legal systems, and I think that's horrible.
Yeah.
I do have one question that I'll read from the live chat, and it's from an ANCAP on YouTube. He's known as My Two Cents. then I want to go into the weekly song like I usually do at every end of every episode I do on my show. So, anyways, my 2 cents question is: would you argue that in logical order we should eliminate welfare/voting, though we already got your answer about voting, prior to eliminating state-enforced borders?
Well, probably if I had my druthers, I'd eliminate both at the same time and both right away. As Murray Rothbard said, if there were a button there that I could eliminate stuff, I'd blister my thumb pressing the button.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But if I had to pick, which one would I eliminate first? Well, probably I'd eliminate welfare, because then we'd sort of solve the what do you call it? The immigration problem, is a lot of those people are coming here just to get welfare. And if there were no welfare of any type, not just explicit welfare, but medical welfare, educational welfare, then that would alleviate the problem somewhat.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
To those who had other questions, did you say we had a few minutes left, Walter?
Well, it is an hour now. Let's make one last question. I gotta get back.
All
I
right.
gotta get back to work. The reason you guys want me in the first place is just what I write. So I want to write some more stuff.
All right. So I'll go ahead and ask my question. Can you describe Murray Rothbard for us? Because we heard what David Friedman had to say. We'd like to hear what you have to say.
Okay, on the question thing, look, we can do this in another month or 2 or 3. So if you have more questions, I'd be delighted to be on your program again.
Okay.
The big problem I had with Murray Rothbard was stomach cramps. Why did I get stomach cramps? Because Murray Rothbard was so funny. He was hilarious. He just drove me crazy, and I'd be sitting there for hour after hour laughing, and I'd try to get up from his couch, and I couldn't stand because I had stomach cramps. Other than that, that's my personal criticism of Murray. Other than that, my favorite composers are Mozart and Bach, and I see Mises and Rothbard as the Mozart and Bach of economics and liberty. I can't praise Murray enough. I think Murray is magnificent. I can imagine what David Friedman said about him, but I would reciprocate and say roughly similar things about his father and him, Milton Friedman. So that would be my answer. Guys, again, thanks for having me on your show. And in a month or 2 or 3, if you want to do it again, I'd be delighted.
Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, Walter.
Yeah, thanks.
This was
I'd love to
incredible.
personally, because I have a lot more questions than I wanted to ask.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Okay, well, in a month or 2, we can get together again.
All right.
All right. Keep
Take care,
being
man.
productive, and we'll talk to you next time.
Take care, guys. It was a pleasure.
All right. Bye, Walter.
Bye.
So, with that being said, guys, how about I go ahead and just dive into the weekly song?
Gorgeous.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So with that being said, time for weekly song. Drum roll, please. All right. So this week's weekly song is a very old song by Eric July, and it's called "The Capitalist" by Fire from the Gods.
I don't think Fire from the Gods is Eric July.
Well, this era of Fire from the Gods was Eric July.
Okay.
Today's era of Fire from the Gods, it is not Eric July. He left Fire from the Gods long before I think shortly before he started Backwards. So
Yeah, okay.
yeah, so don't worry about the song. The song is awesome. So Eric is in the music video. Link will be in the description box. So with that being said, I want to thank Walter Block. I want to thank Esso, Heartless especially for getting Walter onto the show. Hoplu for coming on at long last, and Night Shift. I just want to thank you all for tuning into the Nate the Voluntarist live stream, and please come back soon.